Oh, I'm excited about this one. This week's episode of I-501-CU, we are speaking with Joe McKenna, the president and CEO of the Sarasota Orchestra. We heavy discussion on governance and what Joe's been able to build over there on roles, responsibilities, and using the committee structure. Topics I talk a lot about in board retreats, but Joe has definitely embedded that, he and his organization. So please, I hope you will enjoy this. You're going to learn something from Joe McKenna. On this week's episode of I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the pleasure of interviewing Joe McKenna. Joe, and most people in the town know Joe. Joe is the CEO of the Sarasota Orchestra. Joe, I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let you do that. Can you share with the audience a little bit about yourself, your past, and how you came to be CEO of the Sarasota Orchestra?
Well, I've long had a passion for music and education. I'm a graduate of the New England Conservatory in Boston, where I got my performance degree and education degree. I taught public school for a few years, then wound my way into arts administration and served as a faculty member at Wheaton College in Massachusetts for about 7 years, and then transitioned into arts administration mostly full-time. Had a post in Massachusetts and then in the Midwest for several years, and then came to Sarasota in 2001. And it's been fascinating and interesting and exciting.
That is an absolute understatement. And your accent is coming through. That New England accent, you still have not lost that, have you?
It's still with me. So for whatever liability is, please accept it.
No, I like it. So you've been CEO since 2001. And you've led the orchestra through some very, dare I say, interesting events. COVID-1, site selection for a new music hall, which we're going to talk a little bit about, the death of a conductor. How did you do this? What is your leadership philosophy to manage through these crises?
It's a really interesting question. I think my leadership style has evolved over, almost 3 decades of leading organizations. I became a nonprofit CEO at age 25. So I've had a lot of iterations and curves, but I think a fundamental, my core philosophy is to respect people. That's staff, that's musicians, board members, community leaders. That's number one. Second is bring fairness to all of the work and a sense of compassion. And then I think third, make sure you communicate well to all of the various constituencies and partners. I know in all of the things that we work through, and going back shortly after I arriving in 2001, 9/11 was sort of the first thing to navigate. Then the Great Recession, COVID, the loss of a music director, all of the things related to expansion. So these principles of respecting people, this sense of fairness and compassion, and really being a strong communicator, I think is super helpful. And I just add, I think the communication piece is so critical, especially since the advent of social media, where everything moves quickly and with lightning speed. So really having the communication factor, if people know what they're trying to do, you got a better chance of achieving it.
Well, that's well stated. Now, I've heard you say a number of times that you are a governance junkie. Tell the audience a little bit about that, why, and then we're going to talk a little bit about governance.
Yeah, so, as I went through high school, I was a lover of history and words and English, and especially so, really thrived in civics. Just fascinated with the governing structure and models. That's, I think, where my early passion for it grew. And then, when I started professionally, after I taught public school for a couple of years, I ended up in an administration position at Wheaton College teaching there. And my first big assignment in governance was there was a program and still there in Southeastern Massachusetts. It's called the Southeastern Massachusetts Arts Collaborative, SMARTS for short. And it's a consortium of multiple public school districts. And I helped sort of architect a collaborative project between Wheaton College, where I was a faculty member, and the Southeastern Massachusetts Arts Collaborative. Very disparate, different kinds of entities, one based in the public school sort of environment, the other a liberal arts college. So that worked out, and we founded this wonderful group, and it's done great things. It's thriving, since I left it a number of years ago. So that was one area. And then I think, when I was in Cedarburg, Wisconsin, that was an interesting assignment that it was a public arts venue, and I was there to help oversee the last 6 months or so of construction, open the facility, created a separate nonprofit board to assist with fundraising to support programming. Again, another example of blending this partnership of private and public together. And then I would say really a significant hallmark event happened shortly after I arrived in Sarasota. The Selby Foundation and then President and CEO there, Deborah Jacobs, hosted a workshop for a handful of arts organizations around the topic of governance. And Sandra Hughes was brought in to sort of facilitate that discussion. I'd only been here a relatively short amount of time, I think maybe a year or so, maybe less than a year. And then that struck up sort of a relationship with Sandy, where we worked with her for about a 10-year period, which was fantastic. A lot of my training and mentoring came from Sandy. A lot of the changes we made at the orchestra over time came from Sandy. And then I had the opportunity to work with Chuck Loring, also consultant, a little bit more both on governance, but bends a little bit more to the philanthropic and development side. And then a little more than a decade ago, I had the opportunity to study governance at the Kennedy School at Harvard with Bill Ryan, one of the authors of Governance as Leadership. And I've retained a relationship with Bill over the years, having taken his course with people from all over the world, and then sort of, picked his brain and gotten advice and counsel. So I think about 25 years of being on this governance journey. And I just firmly believe if the governance is working, other things can happen. And if governance is not working, virtually nothing can happen.
Oh, I like that last statement. So we got board members who are listening, maybe that haven't been entrenched in the nonprofit sector for too terribly long. How do you define governance? Can you explain governance? And then I'm going to ask you to talk why it's so important in a nonprofit organization.
I'll say that the Governance as Leadership book, of which Bill Ryan is one of the three authors, I think is one of maybe the finest book written on governance in the last 25 years. That's just a personal view. The premise is that governing is sort of organized in three modes, one being fiduciary, one being strategic, one being generative, the sort of ideas on how you put a path of an organization to go forward. So I use that sort of as a framework and a benchmark. It's extraordinary. All boards need to operate in all three of those modes. I think most boards should ask themselves, how much do they operate in those three modes? Some boards tend to be heavily fiduciary, do a little bit of strategic work, never really think about bold, transformative ideas in a generative way. Some boards get so generative and transformative that they forget the basics of they have to be strategic and make sure the house is in order with fiduciary. So these three guideposts really provide an extraordinarily great framework. And I kind of tell friends of mine that if I were an NFL coach, it's like offense, defense, and special teams. That's how you win. I think the same is true in governing, that fiduciary knitted together with strategic and generative working together. And they ebb and flow. As we know in an NFL game, some games are won by, running up the offense. Other games are won by a strong defensive effort or even a special teams event that might carry the end of a game. So all of these things work together in different ways. And that's really provided the framework and the foundation for how we have actually governed the orchestra in the 25 years that I've been here. In terms of, what do I really think about? If I take those three pillars, I suppose there's a number of ways. One of the things that I think that effective governance is, or effective governance happens when a group of individuals of varied experiences and diverse backgrounds come together. That's first. And then second, really their work being anchored in a spirit of collaboration and a culture of inquiry, where things are healthy and the discussion is robust. And then, creating the environment where all voices are heard, but they're ultimately honed into one unified voice that helps implement policy and govern the organization. And that's how I think about it. The work that we do here at the orchestra and how we structure it, that's how we go about it. I think that's how we've navigated COVID, and we didn't lay off any or furlough any employees. We managed through complex labor agreements. We found a site. We're on the verge of advancing a transformational music center. Those things are all rooted in effective governing and constantly working on it. I think a lot of times people look at governing, well, the bylaws are in order and we've got this and sign that form and check that. Governing is a living, breathing, everyday activity intersecting whatever the events are of the day or the times. And certainly the last few years, we've been living in dynamic times since COVID. And I think one of the things that I'm intrigued by, and we work hard to bring interesting perspectives, different views into the orchestra governing culture. Because, it seems today that we live in a society that people go looking for all of the kind of people that think like them, rather than broadening the portfolio of ideas to end up with something better than a small group that thinks alike would come up with. So, that's a little bit of it. I always say that, that governing is really, at its principle, it's where ideas are vetted and good ideas get implemented. So, I try to keep it simple. Those three pillars: fiduciary, strategic, transformative. Vet the ideas and then make sure we implement the best ones. And that doesn't happen without a strong sense of collaboration with board members, staff members. This whole, it takes a whole organization to create impact. But that's how we've gone about it. Some days we do it better than others. We learn, we grow. But I would say clearly, when I came to the orchestra in 2001, I believe our budget was around $4 million. Today it's nearly $15 million. The scope of programs is different. The artistic quality has risen. And that's all sort of possible because ideas were vetted in a healthy, constructive environment, and the best ideas got implemented to advance the impact of the organization and the mission that we have. So, that's in a simple sort of container, that's how I would describe it.
It sounds so simple, but we know the day in and day out of this. So whose responsibility is governance? If you take a step back, is it the CEO of a nonprofit? Is it the board chair? Is it a governance committee? Who needs to drive it?
I think everybody's responsible for good governance. In terms of driving it, it's different in all organizations. I know here at the orchestra, when I first came on board was about 62 members with a large executive committee in 2001. Today, we operate with 15 board members, maybe up to 20 at any given time. So that range of 15 to 20 with a strong committee structure, no executive committee. The idea being that you want to remain nimble. When you put a committee together of 5 or 6 folks, they know they're responsible for working through an issue and accountable for making a recommendation. And then there's healthy dialogue at the board level to sort of accept or refine that idea to its ultimate implementation. So everyone's responsible. I think here at the orchestra, it's sort of a shared duty between myself, the board chair, and the governance committee chair, as sort of a nexus, if you will. But we have an excellent governance committee. And because we've been sort of operating in this mode, and it takes time. It's when we had to go from a large board to get smaller, a thoughtful way. And I'll go back to those principles about leadership philosophy as we move the board from very large to a more focused, agile group as it is today. It goes back to those leadership principles I talked about: respecting people, how to do that in a thoughtful way, being fair and recognize the level of compassion. People that join a nonprofit board are passionate about their mission, and you want to respect that. Yet at the same time, how do you have to implement things to move forward, and then communicating well so everyone has a sense of this is why we're doing it. So, I'm pretty certain that had we not moved the board from that large board of 62 to what it is today, our ability to come through the Great Recession, our ability to manage COVID, our ability to advance with focus and agility, the Music Center plan, I'm not sure any of those things would have been possible to the degree that they have, had it not been for sort of that level of engagement.
You mentioned something very interesting, and this is a topic of it, and maybe it's been a topic for years. You do not have an executive committee at the orchestra of the board, executive committee of the board. I'm sure, knowing you, a very intentional, strategic decision. Why did you all decide to either eliminate or not have an executive committee?
So the core purpose is, if you want board members to be engaged and involved and committed, there's this inherent structural flaw that if you're on the executive committee and organizing recommendations or dealing with the meaty, substantive, transformational, generative issues, only to then ask another group that's larger to sort of be the rubber stamp. So we basically made the decision to just remove that structural, I'll call it structural flaw. And the 5 standing committees that we have, finance, audit, endowment trustees, governance and leadership, and then development, each of those committees are responsible for each of those areas, reporting to the board. And in effect, the board is like an executive committee. They get to hear the richness and be part of the dialogue of all of the legwork that was done by these committees. But, I think boards, and, I'm not saying being critical, some boards it might make sense to have an executive committee. Boards come in all different sizes, shapes, budget sizes, different kind of service orientation. So, there's reasons why an executive committee might make sense. I will say that at least from my perspective, and recently having attended the League of American Orchestras conference in Salt Lake City, all of my colleagues in Group 2 wanted to know how the governing structure of the Sarasota Orchestra was working. So, I shared our structure and did all that. So, there's not a one size fits all, but I will say that if you remove that tension between, the executive committee's doing the juicy work and then we're here to kind of clean up and just approve stuff, if you tell board members, no, you're responsible for all the important stuff here, it immediately changes the level of focus, engagement, and then the real workshopping of ideas and committees to then come up to the board for deeper and further discussion is really healthy. And, when you assign 6 people on a committee, finance committee members to say, hey, you got to look at how we're going to frame the next collective bargaining agreement or work on the budget. Those 6 people know that they have to take it seriously because then it's going to be discussed among board peers. And I think it speeds the work up because it removes a step. The committee work gets better. There's not a step to go to the executive committee. You go right onto the board and you can move things faster. And I would say that in the world in which we live now, where everything moves fast, for example, when COVID set in, our finance committee meeting was, we were meeting every week, once a week. How do we retain employees, avoid furloughs? What do we do with this? Canceling contracts with get artists, all of these kinds of things. If we had a bigger machine where they had to come through the finance committee to the executive committee, the board, it would have slowed down our ability to actually achieve what we were trying to do. And I think what that was an example of is our patrons and donors who support the institution. The credibility on the philanthropic side grows because they see the level of engagement of the board, the efficiency of the operation, and the ability to respond compassionately to what the organization is currently involved with. So, that's worked here. I wouldn't change it. Probably in another lifetime, I'll go be a sort of a governance teacher. But everything that I've done all the way since the very beginning through all of these positions over the last 25 plus years have helped the orchestra get to the place where its governing model is poised to sort of really meet the issues of the 21st century.
Y'all are very disciplined at the committee level and using committees. I've never seen any other organization do it as effectively as you all. Would you talk a little bit about how you structure the committees? How do they know what their lane is and their lane is not? How frequently do they meet to discuss business?
So of the 5 standing committees, one of the things, first of all, I probably should take a minute that, there's what I call, you mentioned the word lanes. The first lanes is your articles of incorporation. It's kind of like this is your purpose and who you are. You don't change that often. Then there's your bylaws with how the board operates. And then everything below that line is board policies and committee charters. So each of our standing committees has a charter that the board approved. It says what the composition is, what their scope of work is, what their duties are. So, we customarily every 2 to 3 years, we look at those charters. Does anything have to change? How do they be refined? So we just went through that process. In May, everything's been updated. Strategically ahead of all of the work that we have coming with facility planning. But each of those committee charters spells out exactly what each committee does, and it's very clear. So if you're not on the finance committee and you're on the governance and leadership committee, you can look at that charter and know That's what the governance committee is responsible for. And then what we do is we usually early in the new fiscal year, we bring our committee chairs together with the board chair and myself and our chief financial officer. We look at the goals for the year. Is there anything specific that has to be taken up by a specific committee? Assign that to sort of their goals for the year. So it's organized, it's intentional, it's goal oriented, and that allows us to get people that are really interested, engaged. And I think the other thing that the committee structure does that, most board members serve on 1 to 2 committees. And without an executive committee, it means that busy people that are really experienced in whatever they're experienced in, we make it easier for them to be a member of the board at the orchestra, because it might mean I have 4 finance committee meetings a year, or maybe 6 in a given year, except the COVID year, which were a lot more. But as a prospective board member, you look at it and say, well, that's reasonable. I can do 6 to 7 board meetings a year and be assigned to a committee. That's another 4 meetings. And then we get sort of the best talent aligned with the objectives of the organization, being respectful again of people and their time, so that we can get their best contribution to contribute to something that ultimately gives back to the community. I mean, I remind people that that we spend other people's money here every day, and that we're owned by the community, and therefore we have a responsibility and a level of accountability to structure our work so that it has the credibility amongst the broader population. And I think over this, the nearly 25 years that I've been here, this has been a really great, I think, case history kind of story of taking 62 members of a board with an executive committee and a number of other things down to what it is today with committees, no executive committee, and really meet the challenges, Michael, that you mentioned, death of a music director. And that actually was a whole other element. It was a leadership issue, but, the organization grieved through that. So that it was like this unexpected emotional component. While we still needed to deliver impactful programs for the community, the organization as a whole was going through that process. And, the other thing back to communication, I'll just share, and this was something that, out of COVID, just in general, as I've worked with people, for all of these years, fundamentally people, when it comes right down to it, there's 2 things that are important to them: their health and their ability to sustain themselves with viable economic employment. And when COVID came along, it threatened both. So the anxiety level of, gee, I don't know what this, pandemic and it's going to mean for me, and if I'm affected, or how it affects my family. And, gee, I work for an orchestra. We can't present concerts anymore. So we approached that with a much more social service, humanistic point, and communicated why it was important to make sure no one was furloughed. We needed to make sure that when we survived COVID, that an orchestra was intact to move into a music center, but to really look at and be respectful of people. 71% of our budget is human capital. It's people, it's musicians, education, faculty, staff, all the people that make the place work. So, and it will always be that way, because, we can gain efficiency in some ways, but it still takes, 100 players to play a Mahler symphony, or 60 to play an early Beethoven symphony. That's not going to change. So automation or efficiency is not going to change that. And that's why governing is so important here at the orchestra, recognizing in the world in which we live, with AI now coming and all these dynamic changes, we here happen to think that as our core mission, the ability to focus on the human spirit in a world that's become highly, the incivility has grown, people don't listen, AI is creating a new level of fear amongst, what does that mean for certain sectors of employment? So, governing's really, I think it's the soul searching to do good work for, until someone tells me differently, we're all human inhabiting the same planet.
Yeah. So you've teased a couple times throughout this conversation. You're about to give a big gift to our community, the music hall. And so you embarked on this journey a number of years ago. As a leader, how did you position your board, your staff, your volunteers, your musicians to even allow this to happen, to get them excited? Can you talk a little bit about the leadership aspect of this very large project y'all have embarked upon?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it flows from our core pillars of existence, performance and education. The orchestra with all of our music directors in the time that I've been here, Leif Bjaaland did great work, and Anu came and lifted it. And while Bramwell was here a short amount of time, he had an impact. And now Giancarlo really, here at the threshold of our future. But I think it has started with how to get people aware. Was the orchestra playing better, putting on better concerts, making a bigger impact, our educational programs growing? That was sort of the first benchmark. If there's not a need, there can't be a need for a music center. So we started, not surprisingly, strategically with how do we serve the community? The region's growing. We're the oldest continuing orchestra in the state of Florida, 76 years old. Sarasota has this unique sort of brand as an arts community. So all we did was just focus on what we do and make it better. And then through that process, as the community's grown, helping to make people aware that which we're creating today and making better and improving, the constraint of venues and the ability to get dates at the various places we play. The Music Center grew out of need. It grew out of need, and it was based on rising excellence of our educational programs and the orchestra itself and the music festival and all the things that we do. So, when it's easy to help people, when someone goes to a really good concert and they see the orchestra get better and they tell you 2 years later, wow, it's so much better than it was, that's how you bring people along. They want to be part of something that's vibrant and strong. And a good example is after Hurricane Ian, Mary Benzel, a wonderful colleague at the Van Wezel, she and I, in short notice, with the help of several foundation leaders, put together a relief concert, really organized it within a week. And that, gave back, I think, nearly $100,000 back to the community for those that were in need. So it's those kinds of things that demonstrate the importance of the orchestra. I recently just read an article about the Odessa Philharmonic in Ukraine, and the orchestras continue to play through this entire period. And what greater reminder about the power of music and the importance of an orchestra in a community. God, just amazing what they've persevered through and what they experience every day. But that's how you bring people along. You demonstrate the importance. Your musicians and your education faculty demonstrate the value. And because the constraint of venues is so obvious, the need is there. And then it's building that vision. And, you advance that vision and hold people accountable and challenge and, get excited about the ride ahead.
So as the leader, you've got this massive endeavor. How do you keep people working towards that, yet focused on the day-to-day?
So we have an awesome senior team here at the orchestra. It's another thing back to respecting people. So I know that the president of the League of American Orchestras was here a year ago, and he asked the five of us how long we had been with the Sarasota Orchestra. And the cumulative time that we've all been here was 86 years of experience with this organization. And I think the most junior person might have been Nicole, a little more than 10 years. So that's one piece of it. And, we establish goals. We'll have an annual meeting next week. The board has goals. We establish goals for the CEO. Those flow down to the senior team members. We have a review process where we talk about and set objectives and goals. So everybody sort of gets knitted in, and sort of around that is our core values. That sort of anchor our work in terms of how we go about everything we do. So, I think it comes down to people and trust. I mean, even during the COVID period, when people were scared and nervous, and there were a lot of them scared and nervous, this steady, we're going to figure it out. We're going to communicate with you. That's how you keep people on the same page. I find that when things do break down, it's because someone got out of their lane, or didn't collaborate with an appropriate partner, or didn't communicate well. And those are like really easy things to fix. And those are the very things that make big ideas happen. So it's, I suppose it's really nothing more than a lot of the things that we were told in 5th grade or 9th grade, like, this is how you do something. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's kind of how we approach it here. Commonsensical, practical, communication and engagement to make a difference.
Sounds so simple, and it means you live those every day, because as the leader goes, so does the organization. So, Joe, every time I go to the orchestra, you're there. I don't know when you sleep. What do you do as a CEO to decompress and to rejuvenate yourself?
Yeah, so being an orchestra manager is a very atypical schedule because most of our creative staff work evenings, most of our staff work days. So I have to be creative with how I organize my schedule and where to build time in. I think one of the things that makes it possible to be a leader of this kind of organization is the governing structure we have and the quality of our senior team and all of our staff, because we don't waste time. So if you don't waste time, that means you actually do your work better and allows time to be able to have, these rejuvenation periods. But, daily, 6 out of 7 days of the week, I ride my bike pretty much every morning, before I start. So I call it my temple on wheels, no phone, two wheels and me. Sort of sets the dial for the day. And, some days, if it's been a long day, I need to do a bike ride at night too. So, that's just a simple thing. And, time with family, I cherish it. I've worked really hard. My family life is, I keep a balance. So like, I don't run family life into work life, because then there would be no separation of balance. So, as much time as I can get with my family, and then to read interesting things. And in fact, if I were to remember it, if I were to recommend two books for the audience today, one would be the one I praise, Governance as Leadership, which is phenomenal. And I read it every year. I take time to read it every year to refresh and just check in and, sort of do a check on myself. And I sometimes consult it throughout the year to just, if I need to sort of wonder about something. The other book is a relatively new one called Conquering Crisis by Admiral William McRaven. It's a short book, phenomenal, quick lessons. I've read through that, and a lot of those things that are in that book I've sort of practiced, and whether it was the death of Bramwell or COVID, but he put it all together in a very, very excellent, handy little tool. And I would highly recommend that. And I say that to nonprofit boards, but in particular CEOs too. We're living in an environment, AI, the instability in the global landscape, division, all of those things that we've talked about. Everybody should be asking themselves, what's the next crisis? Not that, we got through that one and therefore we shouldn't have it for a while. So I think Admiral McRaven's book, he's got a great way of telling his stories in a very human, down-to-earth way. And I would highly recommend both books for the folks that might tune in today.
Joe, you've been generous with your time. Any last parting words, maybe to an executive director out there just starting his or her career on navigating the board relationship, governance, or just even aspects of the day-to-day job?
Yeah, I had a board member when I came to Sarasota, Alan Fett, a terrific, wonderful guy, was a member of the board here. And, he sat with me in the first, maybe month that I was here. And he said in 2001, we have a big board of 62. That means there's 120 ideas. He said to me, you should write down what you think are the three most important things you do this year, focus on those, and whatever else you accomplish is a bonus. I think we live in an age where everyone's trying to do too much. And we have another board member recently that, coined this phrase of if you're always responding to the urgent, you never talk about the important. And I think there's a lot of value in that to other, executive directors, CEOs, either just starting off or at whatever stage, keeping these simple things in place. So, that would be my advice. And, I think the other thing is just be passionate about the work. When you lose your passion for the work, it's hard to be, effective at what you do.
Yeah, Joe McKenna, ladies and gentlemen, president and CEO of the Sarasota Orchestra. And I'll give you a plug, Joe. If anybody listening, go listen to this orchestra. They're absolutely incredible. My wife and I were never orchestra people till a few years ago, and we just have been enamored by the talent that you have created with that group. So I congratulate you on that, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Nice to be here.
Oh, what an interview now. Recapping with Reed. Reed, 3 takeaways from our conversation with Joe.
I mean, what an absolute board or governance masterclass there. That was crazy. So my first takeaway is if governance is working, other things can happen. If governance is not working, virtually nothing can happen, Joe said.
He did say that. Number 2.
Effective governance happens when a group of individuals come together with their work anchored in collaboration and inquiry, create an environment where all voices are heard, but are ultimately honed into one unified voice.
Boy, very good. I don't know how you captured all this, but I'm impressed because we do this in real time, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead, read number 3.
I thought the conversation about the lack of an executive committee for the orchestra was very interesting. Joe emphasized that it allowed the full board to really focus and dive into some of that work. Everyone feels like they have a responsibility because it's not just the executive committee that's making all the decisions.
People join a board because they want to contribute, and the more you can allow them to engage and offer their expertise, the happier they're going to be, and they're going to recruit fellow board members. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, recapping with Reed from our discussion with Joe McKenna, and we will I-501 see you next week.